All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Think of today as your personal examiner's playbook, designed specifically to help you unlock those top tier grade 8 and 9 marks. We are going to completely master the how and why of Wilfred Owen's iconic World War I poem Exposure. If you're tackling your GCSE English literature exam, you probably already know that just understanding the surface level story of a poem, yeah, that isn't going to cut it. You really need to decode the poet's methods and connect them directly to their core message. And honestly, that is exactly what we're going to do right now. Here is our roadmap for the explainer. 1. Context and frozen trenches. 2. Unpacking the title's meanings. 3. Form, structure, and language. 4. Nature as the real enemy. And 5. Acing the comparison question.
Section 1. Context and frozen trenches.
Okay, so to truly get exposure, we kind of have to mentally leave the exam hall for a second and plunge straight into the freezing reality of 1917. You see, context isn't just about memorizing random historical dates. It's about understanding exactly where Owen's words actually came from. He wasn't writing this from a cozy, comfortable desk back in Britain. No, Wilfred Owen wrote this poem in 1917 while actively serving in the trenches, right in the middle of what was said to be the absolute coldest winter in living memory. The conditions were literally agonizing. The soldiers were suffering horrifyingly from frostbite, hypothermia, and trench foot. It was just a miserable, wet, and freezing existence. In fact, Owen himself was hospitalized for shell shock, which is what we'd call PTSD today, later that same year. And that experience deeply, profoundly informed his understanding of psychological trauma.
Owen's own letters brilliantly capture this lived experience. He wrote, "We were marooned in a frozen desert. The marvel is we did not all die of cold." In one specific, terrifying incident, he and his men were forced to lie outside in an open field in freezing conditions for 2 straight days. He took that agonizing reality and used it to totally shatter the romanticized myth of a glorious, noble war that the British public and the press were being fed at the time. He wanted to expose the true pity of war.
Section 2. Unpacking the title's meanings.
Now, unlocking the title instantly elevates your analysis, right from your very first paragraph. If you unpack the 3 distinct layers of the word exposure, you are going to show the examiner you have a top-tier grasp of the text. First off, we have the literal meaning, the soldier's physical vulnerability to the brutal winter elements, as well as the constant threat of death. Second, the revelation of truth. Owen is exposing the shocking, unglamorous reality of the trenches to ignorant civilians safely back in Britain. And third, and this is a highly sophisticated point to make, photographic exposure. World War I was the first major conflict fought in the age of camera technology, but the reporting was still largely left to war poets. So by controlling the exposure, Owen determines exactly how much of the dark truth the public actually sees. Section 3. Form, structure, and language. Let's open up that writer's toolkit for a minute. And here is a crucial examiner tip for you. Never ever just technique spot. If you just drop the name of a technique without explaining the actual effect it has on the reader, you simply won't get those top marks. For example, Owen deliberately uses para-rhymes or half-rhymes to create a really uncomfortable, unresolved sound. Look at words like naivus and nervous. Because the vowels don't quite match up, the rhyme feels denied. It feels incomplete. And that perfectly mirrors the unnatural tension, the unease, and the total lack of closure these soldiers feel while they're just waiting for an attack that never seems to come. It is absolutely vital to connect the poet's structural choices directly back to the psychological torment of the men. So Owen starts the poem with "our brains ache." That inclusive first-person plural pronoun, our, literally forces us down into the trenches with them, creating this authentic, shared experience of pain. And then, of course, we have that short, simple, hanging line repeated 4 times throughout the poem, but nothing happens. This repetition highlights the psychological paralysis and just the agonizing boredom of it all. Actually, the entire poem has a circular structure. It ends exactly how it begins, which really drives home the point that these soldiers are utterly trapped in a never-ending cycle of dread. Section 4. Nature as the real enemy. This brings us to, honestly, the most shocking twist in the poem, and it's a major theme you'll definitely want to write about. The ultimate enemy here isn't the opposing army at all. Owen uses incredibly powerful personification, completely transforming the freezing weather into a malignant, deliberate antagonist. The wind doesn't just blow, right? It knives the men. By combining the adjective merciless with that violent verb knive, he depicts nature as this unforgiving, malicious force that physically attacks them using stealth.
Basically, nature is a far bigger threat to their lives than the actual bullets flying overhead.
The tragic outcome of all this is captured in a totally devastating metaphor. When Owen writes, "All their eyes are ice," he's actually suggesting two horrifying realities. Either the burying party is looking at men who have literally frozen to death, or, and this might be equally terrifying, the surviving men have been psychologically deadened beyond all emotion. The sheer trauma has just frozen their humanity entirely. Unsurprisingly, the trauma of this extreme exposure leads to a profound loss of faith. Out there in the freezing cold, where nature seems utterly indifferent or even actively evil, the simple Christianity the soldiers might have once believed in suddenly feels completely inappropriate. Nature's cruelty makes the soldiers feel utterly abandoned by a loving creator, which leads to the heartbreaking realization that the love of God seems dying.
So, before we tackle your overall exam strategy, ask yourself why Owen interjects with these specific rhetorical questions. Think about it. The soldiers aren't asking for tactical updates from their commanders. They are questioning their very existence. These questions force us, the readers, to confront the absolute agonizing futility of their passive suffering. They are quite literally trapped in a no man's land between life and death.
Section 5. Acing the comparison question.
All right, let's move to the final boss of your GCSE exam, how to effectively compare exposure with other works in your power and conflict anthology. The real key here is to compare how each poet presents their unique ideas about conflict. So, if the exam asks you to focus on military conflict, Tennyson is a fantastic choice. You'll want to contrast the frozen, agonizing paralysis of Owen's men with the active, unquestioning obedience of the cavalry charge in Tennyson's The Charge of the Light Brigade. While Owen's soldiers are constantly asking, "What are we doing here?" Tennyson's soldiers just follow orders, fully knowing someone had blundered. Both poems are heavily criticizing the leadership that leads to mass suffering, but they do it through completely opposite types of action. Passive dread on one hand versus an active charge on the other. Alternatively, if your theme is more about the broader impact of conflict, pairing it with Jane Weir's Poppies works beautifully. You can deeply contrast the immediate physical horror and direct disempowerment of the soldiers in the trenches with the quiet, devastating emotional aftermath experienced by families left behind on the home front. Both works focus heavily on the meaninglessness of war, but they explore it from two vastly different geographic and emotional battlegrounds. Make sure you keep these 4 examiner tips front and center in your mind when you actually sit down to write your essay. Remember, context isn't just throwing in a random fun fact about the year 1917. It's explaining exactly how that brutal winter shaped the theme of nature as an enemy. Ensure you are analyzing the how and the why of techniques like paramime and circular structure rather than just summarizing the sad story. This level of analysis is exactly what pushes your essay straight into those top-grade boundaries. The famous poet W.B. Yeats once boldly claimed that passive suffering is not a theme for poetry. Well, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to fuel your revision. How does Wilfred Owen completely prove Yeats wrong here? How does a poem where literally nothing happens manage to be one of the most powerful, psychologically terrifying anti-war statements ever written? Take that thought with you into your exam, and I promise you'll do brilliantly. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.